Hi, my name's Nick Frost. I'm independent scrutineer of the Safeguarding Children Partnership here in Calderdale. And this is my contribution to Safeguarding Week, which I'm sure will be a very successful week. I want to introduce some wider themes that will relate to the whole of Safeguarding Week. I'm coming to the end of my tenure in Calderdale, and indeed I'm going to retire over the summer. So I've been 45 years in safeguarding and family support. And as an academic, I've just finished a book called Safeguarding Children and Young People, available in November, written just before COVID. So I want to pick up some of the themes from that book, and which I think are universal, apply across Safeguarding Week. So they are around multidisciplinary working, around coping with change, about learning and professionalism, and about being child-centred. So I'll go through each of those fairly briefly. The whole talk will be about 15 minutes. First of all, multidisciplinary working is something I'm highly committed to. It's the essence of the Safeguarding Partnership, and prior to that I was chair of the Safeguarding Board in Calderdale and in 2 other local authority areas. So obviously multidisciplinary working is core to the safeguarding partnerships and the safeguarding boards. And it's not just a bureaucratic thing. I think it's about being child-centred. Children live holistic lives, so a social worker, a teacher, a health worker can only address aspects of the life, and a holistic approach involves multidisciplinary working. So I'm very committed to that. And I think the partnership and the board have contributed actively to that. Secondly, thinking about change, and then it relates to reflection. Change is a theme of safeguarding. Remarkably, at the beginning of my career, it's rather strange to say this, but child sexual abuse within the family wasn't really on the agenda. And I was lucky enough to work in Leeds with the 2 doctors who led on that in the UK at the time, Chris Hobbs and Jane Wynne. They were pioneers of recognising that child sexual abuse could happen within families. So you can see change happens fairly rapidly and fairly dramatically. In order to cope with that change, it's what we call social construction, using a more academic phrase. There is no fixed thing called child abuse. So again, if I use a personal reflection, and I'm taken aback by this, when I was at secondary school, children were caned in front of the whole school, sometimes on bare buttocks. So I think nowadays we would call those teachers perpetrators, and they would be in trouble with the law. But at the time, it was a cultural norm. So again, illustrates how things change quickly. So to cope with that change, we need to learn and reflect. And that's what Safeguarding Week is all about, helping us learn and reflect so we can cope with change. So whenever we did our qualifying training, inevitably it'll be out of date. And we need to respond to new challenges. So for example, obvious one at the moment, COVID. No one has been trained to deal with COVID. And so we need to come up with new methods and new techniques. That involves reflection, it involves professional learning, it involves theory. So if I provide a theory example, I think this is the starkest one in recent years. We used to call CSE child prostitution, and I'm only going back 15 years now. The government guidance in the early part of this century referred to child prostitution. And it was about 2006 that the phrase child sexual exploitation started to be used. And that changed our response completely. Under child prostitution, children were accused of being complicit, of benefiting from a lifestyle choice. Perpetrators were called pimps or whatever. By using child sexual exploitation, we changed that narrative completely. So we needed a theory to change practice. So as you know, under CSE, the children are seen as being victims of perpetrators, and perpetrators are subject wherever possible to criminal proceedings. And we would never say a child benefits from that lifestyle choice. And then even CSE in the last probably 2 years has become displaced by the idea of contextual safeguarding, which is in Working Together 2018. And that obliges us to think about the community, about streets, about parks, about children being moved from A to B, and obliges us to think about modern slavery, county lines, and child sexual exploitation. So these concepts are really important, and we can't implement them if we're not involved in things like Safeguarding Week, in things such as professional reflection and continuing professional education. So thinking about Working Together 2018, obviously still fairly new. It's abolished safeguarding boards and introduced safeguarding partnerships, and we're still learning about that, no doubt making some mistakes along the way, but that's part of being involved in complex work. And the new Working Together, I've got a few criticisms of it, I must say, but it does emphasise multidisciplinary working, it does emphasise contextual safeguarding, as I've said, and it enables us, through the work of the very effective, you're very lucky here in Calderdale to have a really strong team that work as part of the Safeguarding Partnership. And they do things like learning reviews, plan multi-agency training, do audits, do quality assurance, engage with children and young people on safeguarding issues. So that's all under the remit of Working Together, the partnership of health, police and local authority primarily, and then what's called the relevant partners, the other agencies, the voluntary sector, housing, probation, etc. So within that is the chance to challenge, and we do have challenges, we do have differences of opinion, but they're dealt with constructively and they're used to learn and plan for the future. And the next task of the partnership will be to reflect on hopefully what we might call a post-COVID period, and see what we can do here in Calderdale to make sure that we address that post-COVID period. Nobody really knows what that means at the moment, but we will engage with that and hopefully respond to it. Did want to talk a bit about being child-centred. I'm very committed to being child-centred, and it has been challenged by some academics, and you probably come across some of the work recently by Breeze Featherstone and by Kate Morris and by Sue White, and they've challenged the child-centred paradigm. I think quite usefully challenged it, but I still want personally to stay with that child-centred perspective. They argue that by being child-centred, you can sometimes underlook the needs of parents and the impact of poverty, for example. But I would also want to emphasise the power differential between children and adults. So I'm 100% committed to family support, to tackling poverty, to tackling inequalities, but I think we can do that through a child-centred lens, because all those things are better for children and young people. So we're working on that. One thing we're working on in the partnership at the moment is the idea of transition and how difficult that is for young people when they hit really artificial boundaries that we've introduced, say, between childhood and adulthood. And we are working on that within the partnership. So in conclusion, I just want to thank you all for taking part in Safeguarding Week. I think it will be a good learning experience. The more you put into it, the more you'll get out of it. And it will put you in a good place to take forward your practice and your reflection into what undoubtedly will be a very difficult period for all practitioners as we leave the COVID era. Can I thank you all very much indeed? Thank you.